I'd like to start this event by acknowledging the Gadigal and Wongal people of the Eora Nation on whose lands Writing New South Wales is situated. I pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians and storytellers of all the lands where you're joining us from today. We've got a lot of people in the room. Feel free to make your own acknowledgement of country in the chat box if you'd like to do that. So our guest today is Jon Page. Jon has been in the book industry for over 25 years. He is currently the general manager of the flagship Dymocks Sydney store on George Street. He began his bookselling career in his family's bookshop, aptly named Pages and Pages Booksellers. He also managed the online bookstore Boomerang Books for 5 years. He was a committee member of the Australian Booksellers Association for 9 years, including 3 years as president. And he was a member of the Book Industry Collaborative Council. Jon is extremely passionate about books and reading and wouldn't want to work in any other industry. And we're lucky to have him in ours. Welcome, Jon.
Thank you, Sophie.
So, Jon, I thought we could start by just finding out about you and your kind of reading history. Like, were you a big reader as a kid, and what got you into reading?
I don't think I was a huge reader as a kid. My mum has always been a passionate reader, and she was always trying to get books into my hand and get me to read. But I wasn't as prolific as I've seen some kind of customers at the similar age that I was. I was really into Asterix early on. I think that's where my appetite for collecting books started, because I can remember being 7 or 8 and I had to collect all of them in the same format, and every time a new one came out it was kind of like it was a mission. So my local bookshop was the Forest Bookshop, and they had this brilliant little kids corner, and every time we went up there it was just be straight in, beeline to where the Asterix books were to see if they got one that I hadn't got in my collection yet, and then begging to do that. And then as I got into kind of high school and things, I think school didn't infuse a passion for reading in me. I have a really bad habit of, if I'm told to read something, even now, it makes it so much harder for me to read it. So I can never join a book club. Any kind of publisher or anything that kind of has a book, if they tell me I have to read it by this certain date, that really puts me right off. So some of the books at school it never connected for me, because it was always being forced, and then obviously then dissecting them as well. So I read for enjoyment rather than kind of looking into things, and my mum slowly kind of found books for me to get into. So things like John Grisham and Michael Crichton kind of reignited my reading in my teenage years. Mm-hmm. And then I was lucky enough to have my mum, because he was so passionate about books, wanting to open a bookshop, and then suddenly had a whole bookshop at my fingertips. And then the whole world of books anywhere around the world you're able to order in. So that kind of set me off on that path from there.
That's great. And so I'm guessing that perhaps you didn't always kind of want to work in the book industry as a kid. Was that something that you had kind of, foreseen in your future?
No, I did want to get into writing. So I always wanted to be a writer, but I just don't think I ever had the creative writing talent, as some of my English report cards and comments from teachers and marks throughout school probably attested to. And then I kind of gravitated towards journalism. So when I finished school, that's what I wanted to do. I spent a week work experience in year 10 with a cousin who was a journalist, and really loved that kind of aspect. And that's what I wanted to study. But the studying didn't click for me either at the time. I probably needed more of a gap between school and studying. But again, the bookshop was there, and that was my kind of job. And I ended up my decision was made through, well, I could either choose the books I want to read and then recommend those to customers and sell them, or be told what to read. And I gravitated towards that. I'm going to choose what I want to read. And that's what I really loved about bookselling, was I could find an author that may not have been the mainstream book or the popular one or the one the publisher was pushing, and find that kind of little niche book and then try and get people into that author as I got along. And that's really what I've fallen in love with even now, 27 years later. It's finding that book that no one's heard of and trying to make it a big book is kind of a really special feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we will definitely come back to that, because I think that's amazing. But can you tell us about your career journey from starting then to work in books, and how it kind of led you to Dymocks and your current position?
Yeah, definitely. So I was really lucky having a family business. And I basically just learnt on the job. So just started off working on the floor and then just slowly learning. I mean, again, the shop was only, a year old I mean, even before the shop was open, I actually used it as my business studies case study for year 12 business studies. So I kind of was learning about the business and everything even before it opened. And then just learn on the job. So learn about stock ordering, learn about the selling process from publishers, learn about returns, learned about, trying to stock management, cash flow, all those things, and just slowly took on more responsibility over the years. And then I think about 4 years into our bookshop, our first bookshop was in Belrose in Sydney's north, for anyone familiar with that area. A bookshop in Mossman came up for sale, which was called Mosscraft at the time. It was a bit of an institution in Mossman. I think they'd been there for 12 or 14 years, and the owners were retiring. And my parents wanted to expand, so they bought that business, and that then gave me the responsibility of running the original shop, because they moved over and started running that one. And again, I think I was 21, 22, and running a small business, which, that just doesn't happen. That was an unbelievable opportunity. So again, then learned even more, because I was on my own running that shop and managing staff and doing all that. And then about kind of 5 years after that, we closed the Belrose store because, the shopping centres, which we'll probably touch in later, shopping centres are not good for bookshops. We saw the writing on the wall there, and we didn't renew our lease. And I went over to the Mossman store, and again, it was a bigger beast, a bigger store, a bigger clientele, and then learned more from that. And then I progressed into the Australian Booksellers Association. So my parents had been members of that association from when they started. And an opportunity came up for me to join. And then I got to learn a whole other side of the industry. So not just how the industry worked for my shop, but how it worked for other shops, how it worked for chains, how it worked for independents, how it worked from the publisher's point of view, and all the kind of negotiations and, things that go on between all the different stakeholders in the industry. And that was a great experience. I loved being on the board. I really enjoyed being president for the 3 years. Again, really lucky to have gotten that role and got to learn from other people in the industry as well. So Fiona Stager was president before me, who owns and runs Avid Reader in Brisbane. And the wealth of knowledge she has, and the way she deals with crises and other stakeholders as well. She was a real inspiration to me. And to follow in her footsteps was fantastic. Derek Dryden, who used to own Better Read Than Dead, was another mentor of mine as well. And just got to meet a lot more people in the industry. Kind of almost got out of the shadow of my own parents that way as well. So that was a great experience. And then I finished that time, and my parents retired, so I took over the business as a whole, which was really fun. But then obviously you got a lot more pressures coming in as well, and our rent in Mossman just kept going up and up and up, and the demographics started to really shift. And we bought an online retailer, Boomerang Books, to try and kind of stem some of the lost business we were seeing with people migrating to other online retailers. We tried to kind of get in on that, but the investment you have to make on an online is immense. There's that kind of that whole idea of, there's no overheads when you run an online business, but there's more overheads, I reckon, on an online business than there are for a physical shop, because you've constantly got to maintain your website. You've got to pay and feed the Google beast and others to make sure that you're getting the traffic flow and things you don't necessarily have to pay for in such a direct way when you've got a bricks and mortar bookshop. So that was another great learning experience. We had that for 5 years, and it ended up becoming more of a burden to the store than anything else, because we had to have staff and cost, and the costs were just getting too high, and the return was just not paying off the investment. So we sold that business, and then we tried to keep the Mossman store going. And in 2019, the lease came up again, and crunched the numbers, and it was, do I really want to put my house on the line for this next lease? Are we going to make it? Because we'd done that. We had made that decision. Every lease we'd signed, it was like, are we going to make the next 2 years on this lease? Can we do it? It was like, yes, we're going to do X and Y and Z. And this one came up, and it was like, we've tried X, Y, and Z, and it's just not working. And we pulled the pin, which was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, because I was going to run that shop for the rest of my life. My kids were going to kind of take over from me. They loved coming and working after school and on weekends and in school holidays. And we kind of saw that whole progression, and to make that decision not to do it anymore was really, really hard. But obviously we did that a year before COVID. And I think given the position the business was in, COVID would have knocked us straight out. We wouldn't have been able to pivot or survive. It would have just sent us over the edge. So that made the decision. And luckily I got an opportunity with Dymocks. I actually approached Dymocks to see if they wanted to take over the Mossman store as a franchise. And they didn't, because they'd actually just put a new franchise in a neutral bay, and they were like, that's not how our model works. And in that process, they offered me a job. So I came across to Dymocks Sydney. I was running the children's floor here initially, and then the position of general manager opened up, and I jumped at that and have been running the flagship store now for 3 years. And again, yeah, two of the toughest years you can imagine. So COVID in a CBD store was very difficult, and having to manage staff and not laying off staff, but also not having hours for them as well. But then we also got to ride the bounce back in the last 12 months, where people have come back to the work city, and the changes that's made. There's been massive changes coming out of COVID, which have been really exciting too.
That's great. That's great. And I mean, Dymocks is so lucky to have someone with such a wealth of experience in the role. That's great. I just wonder, like, managing a store and managing a family business at the age of 21 is pretty incredible. And although I think people from the outside kind of feel like, oh, well, it's just a family business, so there's no pressure. And I kind of feel like it's actually the opposite, when you feel like, like the financial stability of my family is on the line. That's an enormous amount of pressure. Do you feel grateful for that opportunity now with, like, a little, I mean, you're still super young, but a little bit of distance from that?
Thank you for that, about the young comment. Yeah, no, and again, I'm still learning all the time. Like, there's even stuff now that I'm learning the way the Dymocks run business is like, oh, I wish I could have, like, that's a great way of measuring things, and I wish I'd have done that in the business as well. That could have given us an advantage, or made some cost savings and been a different way of doing things as well. So there's lots of different things to learn. But yeah, having that opportunity at 21 to being under in a family business to learn is great. But also, it was a kind of a bit of a safety net though too. So yes, there was a responsibility of the family business on the line. It was probably more pressure once my parents retired than before, because it was kind of a bit more shared. And being that young, my dad in particular took a lot more control of the finances himself. That was his strength. My mum's strength was the books, and his was the finance. And then I kind of fit in between and tried to learn off both of them. I think I've learned a lot more now than I had back then as well, which would have been good to go back with as well, because there's some things your parents will teach you, and there's some things they don't teach you sometimes, and that's true of life, not just business. So but yeah, it was a great opportunity. And and also you get to, technically they were my boss too, but you also get to kind of push back on your boss like you wouldn't do in a different scenario as well, which also is a great way of learning and finding out and making mistakes. Making mistakes is the best way to learn. Sometimes if you're too afraid to make a mistake, then you never tried things different. So it was a great environment to learn and try and do all those things in.
That's great. So tell us about, like, an average day as the general manager of Dymocks Sydney. Like, what does it involve? Are you, like, do you get to spend any time out on the floor hand selling and stuff like that? What are you up to?
Not as much as I used to. So yeah, that's the big difference in a big business. So it's much more. My role is kind of, I'm the strategic for the store. So I'm also on the leadership board of the Dymocks retail. So we've got kind of head of marketing and head of ICT and head of website. So I kind of and head of the other retail stores, and George Street being the size it is, kind of gets its own seat at the table. So a lot of my job is also kind of being the conduit between what we want to do as a group and translating that to a store level. And then it's a lot more management now, a lot less hands-on. So don't get out on the floor as much as I like to, and I'm always trying to get out, but there's a lot more reporting, and there's a lot more kind of feeding back both up and down in my position now as well. So that's, again, learning some more skills in that, and learning to kind of, I'm more of the delegator now. I can't just, in the past it was I would do the window and I would get this stock out of the warehouse and I'd get this price. It's kind of like I've got people that do all those roles. So it's a lot more divided up. So it's about getting all those levers working. So it's a bit more kind of like driving a complicated, I don't know, train or car, and you've got buttons and levers you've got to press and turn up and turn down, and keep within budgets, and you've got to make, we've got sales budgets to make, and then if we don't make them, there's other things we need to kind of turn and turn off and turn on to kind of try and make that difference. So yeah, it's a little bit further away, which is very different. And sometimes I don't like being so far away from the books, unfortunately.
Yeah. So how do you kind of funnel that passion that I know you still have for books, and, you know, you're constantly reading and discovering new authors still, and, you know, enjoying your favorite authors. So how do you kind of funnel that in terms of, like, you know, passing that on to the team, or, you know, having recommendations go back and forth with the team? How does that work?
Yeah, and then trying to nurture their own passion as well. So seeing the passion that certain team members have, and trying to kind of use that and bring that out. Again, the book industry is funny. A lot of people who are very introverted gravitate towards books. And the catch-22 of selling books is you've got to be a bit extroverted, because you've got to approach people and you've got to talk about the books, and you've got to kind of not be that self-conscious about it as well. So it's kind of, yeah, it's trying to bring, not so much kind of let them know what I like and getting them to kind of replicate me, but trying to find what's in them and bring out what I liked and what I like and in them, and doing it their way. So yeah, trying to give them a bit more control in terms of, you know, if they want to stock certain authors or certain books, giving them that power to bring them in. If they like a book and they've been talking about it, you know, do you want a staff pick? Do you want to write a review that goes on the shelf? Or do you want to do that on Instagram? Do you want to try and contribute to the catalog? Do you want to make a TikTok? And things like that. So yeah, and just trying to harness those things in others, and bring it out of other people, and kind of get them to try to do those things that I know work, and trying to do that in a context of a 3-story store in the middle of the city.
Yeah. One of my friends has a t-shirt that says "introverted but willing to talk about cats." And I feel like so many book industry people need that, but willing to talk about books, right? Because there are a lot of people who are super introverted, but if you can get them chatting on books, gosh, they, you know, just come alive. So
yeah, and then they don't stop. So that's the big challenge, is getting them to take that. You've got to take that first step to be successful in retail, unfortunately. So customers will come up to you, but to get the most out of the store, you've got to be able to go up to the customers, and just, you know, enthusiasm and passion is infectious. So it's kind of just trying to infect those around you, whether it's your co-workers or customers, with that enthusiasm and passion is the key, I think.
Yeah. And so we might come back to those conversations with customers in just a second, but I did also want to ask about something that you touched on earlier, and then again here, which is about selling books online.
Yep.
And that question of kind of discoverability, I guess, of, you know, like, it's really easy to have like the shelf talkers and stuff like that in a store. It's a lot harder in an online business to be able to really bring you know, new authors to the fore. And I was just wondering if you had any kind of thought about that in terms of the way that social is playing a role there, or anything else that you have insights into.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things on online, and I can't remember who had the quote, so forgive me for quoting someone without attribution, but it was, you can only find what you're looking for when you go online, because online is designed that you have to input something. So whether it's Google or you're going on to a book retailer, you have to put in the author's name or the book title or the genre, and it's kind of, the input is then from the customer, whereas from a store, you've got people coming and going, oh, I don't know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for my next great read. And that's enough for a good bookseller to then go, right, I can get you a crime novel, I can get you a history book, I can get you literature if you want something a bit heavy, I can get you something nice and light. You know, you can start throwing ideas at people, whereas it's a lot, the input all comes from the customer online. And I think that's one of the key differences. And that's why you see a lot of the, you know, the big brand authors or the established books, or the books that are getting big mass media, they sell online, because the customer goes online and, you know, like right now they type in Britney Spears, bang, it's there, they put it in the cart and they buy it. But it's all that other stuff that can't get found, and discoverability is the big challenge with online. And we saw that during COVID a lot too, when where shops were closed or it was only click and collect, and online was the portal to be used. I remember being super frustrated in the second year of COVID when we were in lockdown here in Sydney, and so all we were doing was click and collect. And the Sarah Winman book had just come out, and it was in our window as we closed down, and it was one I was really Still Life was the book, and I was really championing that book, and we just couldn't sell it. And people would be coming in to pick up orders, and you just want to go, you should try this too, but you have to go back out and order it on your phone, and then come and click and collect it again. And it was just, that was to me, that was in the nutshell of what the limitations of online retailing were. But there are ways around that. There is social media does certainly help. And TikTok is the big one at the moment that has been really driving a lot of sales. But again, the beauty of TikTok and the thing I love about TikTok is that it's actually driving people more into stores than online. So, and that's been the big difference. I think a lot of the social media before, Twitter and Instagram, tended to still drive people online. They were online on Twitter, they clicked on a link, they made the purchase, whether it was an ebook or a physical book. Whereas TikTok, it's about the physical experience of purchasing a book. Like they're telling a story. So it started off a lot about people kind of just filming their reactions to books. So it was Song of Achilles was the one that started, and suddenly a book that was 10 years old went to number one of the bestseller list, both here and in the UK. And that has never happened. I've been in here 27 years. A book it's 10 years old without a movie behind it. I mean, that's the only other time that ever happens. Going to number one for a period of time as well, absolutely unheard of. And it's one of the things we always talk about as an industry, like publishers and booksellers alike. We always want to sell more backlist because the costs have already been absorbed by the publishers when the book was first released. So it's the sweet spot for all of us. We like selling those older books better than the new release books because we all make a little bit more money. Sorry to talk about money in this, but it is what that kind of drives us around. But yeah, so suddenly having a backlist title being number one was great. And it was all through people just filming themselves crying and having emotional reactions to this book. And people were seeing those TikToks and going, I want what they're having, and kind of jumping on that. And then it branched out into a lot of things. And the last 12 months or so, it's all been about filming your journey into a bookshop, filming you in amongst the bookshop shelves and grabbing a basket or making a pile while you're in the store and then purchasing it and then getting home and showing off what you bought. And that's all been about kind of that physical experience. There's no TikToks of people sitting at their computer clicking on a website and then waiting for the postie to deliver their book a week later. So that's been a great kind of boon for physical shops and really drove the refurbishment we've just done here at Dymocks Sydney. So they haven't really redone the store for almost 20 years, and we did a major refurbishment of the ground floor, and we built these beautiful book nooks, and we had in mind, we wanted a place that people were going to come in and film their browsing experience. So that really that was one of the angles that was in our mind when we were redesigning the store. So yeah, the social media thing can turn. I think the TikTok thing is kind of at a bit of a tipping point at the moment. I think we've reached the peak of it at the moment, and you're starting to see it's being a little bit more, the money's coming into it. So it's, publishers are paying for content, other retailers are paying for content. And this happened with Instagram as well. So once you go from the genuine, user-driven content to paid content, it loses that authenticity, I think. And it starts to kind of fall off. I mean, it'll still be there. I don't think it's going to be gone in a month. But I think it's kind of plateauing out at the moment, and it'll drop off. And then there'll be some other new platform that comes along that we can't even possibly imagine right now that will start again. Because I think, again, that's what drives books. It drives everyone. Is we all know that book that we read and hits us in that place that we love. And the first thing we do is we turn to someone we live with and go, you've got to read this. Or we go out to coffee with a friend and we go, you've got to read this. And that's that word of mouth, that snowballs. And that's what makes every bestseller that ever was and ever will be has all been started by someone saying, you've got to read this book I've just read. And it happens in a publisher's office, and it happens in an agent's office. It happens in a bookshop. It happens in every home. And that's the spark that starts all of it.
I think I can't remember, this might be wrong, but I think it was on the S.J. Watson book, Before I Go to Sleep, the best quote or book blurb that I've ever seen, which is the second you finish this book, you want to stand up in the middle of a crowded train and shout to everyone, you must read this. And I think there are times when you really feel that, and it is it's a genuine impulse, and it's powerful.
Gone Girls, and that was one that, because you hit some of those twists and you're like, I need to talk to someone about this, and the only way I can talk to you is you have to read it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've seen so many of those kind of trends happen in the market over the past, couple of decades and a bit. What kind of trends are you seeing in the market at the moment in terms of what's being published? And I guess Are you seeing any kind of mismatches in terms of what's being published versus what the kind of market appetite is for?
Yeah, and there's kind of, this one's a bit two-pronged as well, because there's content obviously, but one of the big trends we're actually seeing at the moment is actually more investment in the actual physical form of the book. And I find this very funny, because 12 years ago when ebooks were out and I was on the ABA and we were being told by politicians and reporters that ebooks were going to be 50% of the market and every physical bookshop was going to be closed into, I remember the small business minister famously saying that there'll be no bookshops left in Australia in 3 years, because ebooks were going to wipe us all out. Again, that was all PR driven as well. The biggest player in the market wanted ebooks to be 50% of the market, so that's what they put out there, and that's the game they played. And yes, there was a lot of early adoption, but it has kind of fallen back. But at the time, we were saying, well, if digital is coming, then we need to make the physical object more attractive, because particularly in the Australian market, hardcovers were almost non-existent. And part of that was economics. They were very expensive. But, in kind of trying to make what a physical bookshop sold, we needed to get more investment into, coffee table books, cookbooks, put that production in. And one of the things we're doing at Dymocks at the moment is we're driving exclusive editions. And we've seen Waterstones have been doing this really successfully in the UK as well, and they've really turned their business around over there in the face of Amazon, which had a really high proportion of not only the ebook market, but the physical book market. And we're seeing customers flock for them. So we're getting these beautiful hardcover editions with like sprayed edges, extra content. We've got a Trent Dalton one at the moment. It's got extra illustrations in there. Some of them are coming with bonus chapters. And people are buying them, and people are spending more money to buy these editions because they want them on their shelves, and they've got that little bit extra for them. So that's the first prong. I think we're starting to see that investment in the physical object. It's not just a kind of a mass market paperback that's just printed for the lowest cost and spat out into the market. Publishers are looking to actually make a quality product. And then there's what people are buying. So the big trend over the last 12 months, and it has been fueled by TikTok, has been the growth in romance. So our romance sales are up 300% over previous years. So there's been massive growth in that. But it's also been in genre across the board. So crime has also grown, fantasy and science fiction as well. So there has been a little bit of a drop-off in what you would call literature, and it always feels a bit weird to describe literature as a genre. But it's kind of once you pull out the genres, it's the thing that's unlabeled and left over at the end. So it ends up being labeled a genre. But yeah, so romance in particular, although we probably need a bit more Australian romance, I think, in that category. It's been very driven, because it's been online, it's very driven by American authors in particular. And there are great Australian romance authors, and they're starting to come through. There's some great debut authors that have come out this year that are starting to kind of make inroads into that market, which is great to see. But we could always do with more Australian content in that market. And probably my favourite one that's actually grown over the last 10 years has been crime, because I've always been a huge crime reader. Always gravitated to, I always like crime, because I used to always like finding the authors people hadn't heard of. So when someone was buying a Lee Child or a John Grisham, you'd slip them an author they hadn't heard of. And I could never sell Australian crime for the life of me. I'm a huge Peter Temple fan, and always had to work that extra. You got to read The Broken Shore. It is really good, I promise you. You got to read Jack Irish. They're great. And then The Dry came along and just broke down that barrier. And I think part of it was a bit of a publishing barrier, but there was definitely a reader barrier as well. There was a bit of a, that Australian cringe of, no, it's Michael Connolly and we want Ian Rankin, we want those overseas. Australians can't do it like that. But they always could. But then The Dry broke down that barrier. And then since then, I've seen a flood of great Aussie crime authors come through. Chris Hammer, I can't name them all. And there's been great debuts coming all last year as well. So that's still growing really well, and the appetite for that is great. We even, in our new refurb, we've actually got a separate Australian crime section now, because it's that important and needs its own place within our store. So that's been really great to see that come about as well. But yeah, I think maybe the worm needs to turn a little bit more back to what you would deem literature, because I'm all here for entertaining books as well. But I think reading is a balanced diet, and you need books to entertain, and you need books to kind of make you think about things as well. So I always think books are a great way of kind of getting into things you may not have heard of, particularly history as well. So, you know, Kate Grenville did it really well with The Secret History. And Melissa Lukashenko with Eden Glassy at the moment that's just came out is a fantastic. The timing couldn't be better. And I think every Australian should be reading that one as well, because what it talks about First Nations people and Brisbane and the settlement of Brisbane and some of the truths that go on, because we weren't taught this stuff at school. And yes, there are some history books that have come out in the last 10 years, but sometimes fiction is that great starting point to get into those stories and then go and read the history and read the non-fiction past that as well.
Great. Just a reminder to folks, we are going to open up to questions shortly. So don't forget to pop your questions into the chat box. Thanks to everyone who's already doing that. So Jon, I mean, I have so many more questions for you. But I don't ask you because I do want to open it up for other people. But obviously, many of the people who are joining us today would be aspiring and emerging writers as part of the Writing New South Wales constituency. And I was just wondering if there are any things that you kind of wish that fairly new authors knew about sort of bookselling at the coalface that they may not be aware of. I know that's a really general kind of question, but are there any kind of misconceptions that you can think of about what it is actually like to be having those conversations with customers about finding a book that you think it would be helpful for people to know?
Probably not so much misconceptions, but challenges. And one of them is just there are just so many books that come out all the time, so that it's really hard for any shop to kind of give space. And it's also hard for particularly a small little independent shop to read everything that comes out. And often what you read as a bookshop owner is what you display. It's one of the things I used to always do at my shop before I came to Dymocks was we would place all the books that the staff had read in the key zones so that when people asked about a book, we'd read it. Because if you put a book kind of, you know, front and center and no one's read it, then you kind of end up with questions going, answers where you go, oh no, we haven't read that one. And that kind of reflects poorly on your reading, but no one can ever read everything that comes out. I think I haven't done the numbers lately, but on an average month outside of Christmas, there's 7,000 titles that get published in Australia every month. And so not all of those are going to get into all stores, and not all those that get into stores are going to get the prime positions, and not all of those are going to be read or known by the staff in the shop. And that's the hardest and the saddest thing. And it's also one of the things, kind of the challenges we've kind of got with new technology. When I first started, a minimum print run was close to kind of 10,000 copies in Australia, which meant a publisher had a lot of units to shift if they were going to publish a book. So they were way more conservative in what they would publish. And then they would do a lot of marketing to try and push something. I remember when Jasper Jones got published with Craig Silvey, it started very slowly to start with, and numbers were quite low, but it came out mid-year, and then Christmas it took off, and then obviously it won awards and went on and on and on. But there was that kind of bit of, is this book gonna make it? Is it on the edge? And there's that tipping point. Whereas what's shifted now is technology. So a publisher doesn't have to print 5,000 or 10,000 of a first print run anymore. They can print 1,000. They can even print lower. And what you're now seeing is a little bit more of a, oh yes, we will publish that, but when they're going to put a little bit out into the market, and we're going to wait and see. And then that book can just vanish and disappear. And I think that makes it the challenge as well. There's a lot more that comes out, and there's a lot more debuts because the gate is a lot more ajar than it used to be. So that first book can get published, but it's getting published in a different way. And sometimes it's not getting all the support up front that it would have, because the publisher doesn't have to move as many units at first. And then once it does move, then they hit the print button, and, there we go from there. But yeah, the model has definitely changed, and there's a lot more testing in the market, if for want of a better word. So, and that makes it much more of a challenge for, I think, authors and for book retailers as well, because again, each shop has only got finite space, and then you've got to compete with the blockbuster author that comes out of that month too, and the books that are in catalogues, and the way all that works as well. So again, the difference between coming from an independent and coming from a chain, an independent is independent. They will choose the books that go in their newsletters and go in their catalogues, whereas some of the chains is a little bit more toing and froing with publishers over what goes in. So there's definitely a different game going on as well, and that affects what gets eyeballs on websites and in catalogs and in stores.
And you mentioned earlier the difficulty that bookstores have in terms of rents, right? Like this is a massive issue, and pretty much, you know, over my career, I would say, I don't know, 80-90% of the bookstores that have tragically closed, it is like, that is the thing that you hear. It is that the rent went up, we couldn't do it anymore. Like it just wasn't going to make sense. And there is like this tiny profit margin in bookselling, right? Like if you're lucky, it's like 2%. So that is obviously a big challenge. And I was just wondering how the kind of cost of living crisis is affecting that, and if that is something that your team is hearing from customers about the price of books. Is that a conversation that's happening a lot? Do you know?
It is happening a bit. So book prices have come up, but we're also seeing that in trends in the market as well. So that and this is kind of a bit counterintuitive, but it will make sense when I explain it through. So yeah, book prices have gone up about $2 to $5 depending on what it is. Non-fiction has tended to go up more than fiction so far. I think a lot of publishers have held back on pushing fiction up, and for how long is going to be the challenge on that, because everything, like the big price in Australia is transport, because you know we're a large spread out country, and books have got to be shipped to Western Australia, to South Australia, up and down the East Coast. That adds money, printing costs as well, and then anything with any illustration in Australia gets printed overseas. So coloured picture book all gets printed in Hong Kong. So then you've got the shipping of the boat to get that in. So lots and lots of costs that I know a lot of publishers have absorbed more than they probably should at the moment. So there's probably still some more price rises coming through. But what we've seen a shift to book purchases being made in what we call the discount department stores. And then that's had a fruition in the average selling price of a book in Australia has actually dropped this year. So book prices have gone up, but the average selling price has actually gone down. And that's because we've seen people move to where the discount department stores are selling books below cost. And it's been a bugbear for 20 odd years. It was a bugbear when you were in bookselling, Sophie. Yeah, the model, it's great on the one hand. It's great that the big W's and the Targets of this world see books as a draw card to bring people into their stores. But their method in doing that is to price these books below cost. And devalue books. Don't think a new release is worth $16 when the RRP is $32. And I think they look like instant remainders, and I don't think any new author should be remaindered the day they're released. But that's their model is they sell them below cost to bring you into Big W and buy something that they're probably selling at a 200% margin. And that's how it works. But that has certainly put a lot of bookshops out of business in my time. And it's a huge challenge. And then you're on top of the rents. Someone very smart once said to me, never open a bookshop in a shopping centre. Every bookshop that does it, they'll get in on a cheap rate. The way the shopping centres work is they roll the rent up every renewal, and then you'll get to the point where you can't do it anymore and you have to go, and you'll see that at your shopping centre all the time, that the bookshop that was there 6 years ago is suddenly gone. And that was, their rent just rolled up. And then even for us on a high street is generally the safer place, but a landlord just wants return on their investment. And our shop got leased out to a bank, and a rent to a bank is pocket change in their business model. So it's all competitive out there, and it's the toughest part of the market. But the one thing I always said that when I was on the ABA and we were talking about the threats of bookshops, the ebooks and online and Amazon are not going to finish bookshops off. What's going to finish bookshops off are the next generation of bookshop owners, because to sign a lease, you have to have you've got to have a guarantee behind you, which is generally property, and young people can't buy houses, so they're not going to be able to have the property to guarantee a lease to open a business. So when some of the great booksellers of this world finish up, it's the next ones that are going to take over from them that are going to be the real threat, taking over for them. Luckily, there's next generation. So you've got Mark Rubbo has passed on to his son. But there's some other, that's the biggest fear is how is the next generation of booksellers going to be able to open stores? And you've got to do it as a passion. You can't, if you're going to open a bookshop to make money, go away, go and open a Boost, go and buy into something else, because you do it because you love it. And my accountant used to always say to me, John, you're never going to make lots of money out of this. I'm like, that's fine, as long as I make enough to, pay my rent or pay my mortgage or, survive, as long as I make enough to make a salary, it's all I want, because the rest of it is fun and you get out of bed in the morning and it's the best job in the world to go and recommend books. It's all the other stuff that makes it harder.
Yeah, absolutely. So pivoting from there, Charlene has asked, have you seen many Dymocks staff move from working with you at Dymocks to the publishing industry? Is that a kind of feeder?
All the time. And we often get people back from the publishing industry too as well, because it's not as glamorous as we see on TV either. Bookselling is not as glamorous as you ever see in a movie or reading a book, and it's publishing's the same. So, but yeah, people love books and they want to be in the industry and getting into retail. I think it's a really good way of getting into publishing, because I think to be a good publisher, you need to know how a book works at the coalface, works with the reader, what makes a reader pick up a book, how readers find books. So yeah, no, we got, even when I was in an independent bookshop, I had lots of staff go through my shop and get into publishing, and some of them are still there. And yeah, it still happens now, but some do gravitate back too. So, and I'm always here to grab them when they come back to retailing as well.
That's great. And I think also, we've been doing several panel sessions recently with publishers, and they all say that in the pitch documents that authors are sending them, they really want authors to have done their research, or writers to have done their research, to say, this is where my book would sort of sit in the market. Like, I'm similar to this author and this author, and, those authors should not be like John Grisham and I don't know, whoever else. It should be like, you need to have done some research. And I feel like working in a bookshop is like the ideal way to actually understand the market, right?
Yeah, 100%, because that's, to sell more, and you always need to grow sales, you need to convert people who have bought those authors previously into something else. So you're always looking for, how can I turn a John Grisham reader into a reader of this? Or how can I turn a Daniel Silver reader into this other spy series? Or I've just read this new author, who is it like that I can sell it to? Because that's your gauge. I mean, you don't have a questionnaire for your customers to fill out when they ask for a recommendation. You've got, 10, 15 seconds, and you have a few key questions that you try and decipher what they're looking for. And it doesn't matter if it's a children's book or non-fiction or fiction. It's, what did you read last? Who's your favorite author? And then you've got to use your bookselling brain to connect all those dots and find a recommendation. So yeah, whenever you read something, you're trying to work those dots backwards as well. So, and then publishers do it to us all the time when they're selling something in. This new author is like X and Y. And again, you can't read everything. So sometimes you've got to take what the publisher tells you on board as well, because that helps you as well, because you've got to know as much stock as you possibly can. And there's all different ways to do that.
So Lisa has asked something that we haven't covered. She has asked, do bookstores ever stock self-published authors?
It differs from shop to shop, and again, it's always challenging. We don't in Dymocks, because it's too hard to do a consignment model, and generally it's a consignment model on self-published. So it's about we don't pay anything up front, and then just pay for the books that are sold as as you get more books off the self-published author. Being a big business, it's a little bit too hard to work. But in an independent, we used to do it all the time. But again, we get approached by so many self-published authors, so it is very challenging. And for me at Mossman, we always used to only do it when there was local content. So if it was a local history book that had been self-published, or it was a local author, we would definitely do it. Because the first question we ask is, what is going to make people come in and purchase this book? And to be honest, I'm not going to read a self-published book because I've got a giant stack that, every publisher in Australia has got me to read, and they all get prioritized as well. So you make the decision based on who you think is going to come in. And for Mossman, we used to take them if there was going to be some kind of local marketing. And that's what we'd have a little form that we'd get people to fill out. And we'd say, like, either try and get it in the local newspaper, or have a local angle that's going to have your family and friends come in and start recommending it to other people, or there's some local content, the book's set in Mossman or set in a local area, and that's what people are going to be interested in. But it's very challenging, and yeah, there's just as many self-published authors out there as there are traditional authors, and they're all competing for that as well.
Eugene Bacon. Hi, Eugene. has asked, Jon, do results of national book awards and reviews in mainstream media influence what you choose to put in the display table at a given time? And do publishers pay to feature author books on a prominent display table?
They don't at Dymocks pay to have them displayed, but I know that's been done in the past. I know Borders, before they went under, they were trying that model, and I'm sure it'll be tried again in the future. So that is possible. The challenge with media 15 years ago, I would go through the Saturday Spectrum from the Sydney Morning Herald every Saturday like clockwork, because every book that was reviewed in that you would have people coming in for. Sadly, that does not happen anymore. And I would say that's more about the death of mass media. There's no mass media anymore. There's no mass, TV ad would used to send people, no, TV's not mass media anymore. Everything has been divided up. So whether it's TV, it's all been splintered by pay TV and streaming. And I can't remember the last time I watched what they call terrestrial TV. I don't even have my TV plugged into an aerial. It's all streaming and things like that. So I rarely see any ads. So that's that one challenge. And then print media, people are reading whatever their favorite newspaper is. They're doing it online. They're doing it through social media, and they're clicking on the articles that they want to. And they're not finding the things that discoverability, just like buying a book online, has diminished. So that has really narrowed. And then awards, there are too many awards, and that has all, again, same problem as the media. It's all divided up. So the one award that drives bestsellers is the Booker Prize. And for some reason, they have decided to announce it at the end of November instead of the beginning of November this year. So I do not know what's going to happen with that this year, because the biggest challenge in announcing award on the 26th of November is every printing house in Australia is busy reprinting books for Christmas, and getting that slot is going to be impossible. I'm sure every publisher has probably booked a slot just in case, and everyone that didn't make the shortlist has cancelled those slots, and now you've just got the shortlist publishers with that tentative slot booked in, because they're only going to be able to print one lot of books for the Booker Prize this year. The Miles Franklin used to sell a ton. It doesn't sell as many as it used to. There are various issues about that. I've got my own opinions about why. On that one, I think we may have watered down the uniqueness of that award. The Stella does. Well, the Miles Franklin it had its originality. It used to have to be about an aspect of Australian life, and I think that disappeared over time. So it used to be you could be an international author and be shortlisted or win the Miles Franklin as long as you were writing about a book that was set in Australia. And that they seem to veer away from that. And I think they're trying to come back, but sometimes once you let the horse out, it's hard to bring it back in. And then obviously the Stella Prize has come along, and it's done a great service, I think, to recognising female writers in the Australian industry, and that does drive sales as well. But all the others, they're a little bit blips here and there. Us for Dymocks, we have a Dymocks award that actually drives sales for us through our network, but I'm not sure it reaches outside our network. I hope it does, because we do pick a good book every year. But stuff like the Prime Minister's Literary Award has never driven that many sales, unfortunately to say. I mean, the winner does get a nice prize, but it doesn't drive a lot of sales just because there's so many. But yeah, the Booker still has that magic. But the rest kind of are a distant second to that one so far.
At least, as you say, some of those other awards that don't have that kind of commercial crossover, at least they do manage to fund a writer to write another book potentially. So that's a benefit. But
I'd like to see the Miles Franklin get back more to that pedestal. And they've listened to the criticisms of how that award was given out and who was getting favoured by it. But they've just got to try and bring some of that audience back, and because to me it's still the most prestigious award for an Australian book is the Miles Franklin, and they do have a great way of picking a book that's literary, but it's not too literary. It's readable, it's accessible by lots of readers, and that should be celebrated and cherished. And I just don't think it's hitting the same mark as it used to 15 years ago.
Therese has asked about a comment that you made earlier that COVID has changed things for bookselling. And I think Therese thinks you said in a good way.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. So pre-COVID, we were in this, I think the book industry goes in these kind of decades. So the 2000s to 2009 were the peak of the book industry. We had Harry Potters and Stieg Larssons and Da Vinci Codes driving readers into stores. It was getting people who hadn't bought, people were buying the Da Vinci Code going, this is the first book I bought in 10 years. And then those people were staying reading books. So it was a boom time to be selling books in those 10 years. And then...
Really also?
Yeah. And then it started to drop. So the next 10 years was kind of a bit of a dip as kind of people started buying more online, people started buying more digital. There was a bit of a drop off, and even just the overall volume of books in the whole Australian industry just began to drop year on year throughout that decade. And then COVID, I think what it was people went back to working on their screens. They had to work from home. So they were on a screen doing what we're doing now. They were on Zoom 9 to 5, and kids were at school on a screen 9 to 5. So when work and school finished and you were still stuck at home because you were in a lockdown or you didn't want to go outside, the last thing you wanted to do was pick up a screen and read another book, or go and watch Netflix because you were burnt out, your eyes were burnt and drying, and you'd had enough of a screen. So people rediscovered books. And so our website, which was the only way, went way up for Dymocks at that time. And I know it did for every other Australian book retailer that had a website. And then once we were all allowed back out into the world again, that's just continued. So volume of book sales has gone up since COVID and has continued to go up. And it was the impetus to drive people back to print books because it's an alternative to the screen, and it's great for children. It's great for us. It's got so many great benefits in all our lives as well. And a lot of people just went back to the print and ditched the Kindle and ditched the e-reader and came back to print. And then at the same time, we're now printing these beautiful editions of books for people too, so they can have them in their Zoom backgrounds if they want to. But also, I love a good hardcover, and I've been buying them for overseas for years, and now I can buy them locally, which is great too. So, but yeah, that's what changed. So hopefully this is the start of the next, this is the start of the upswing decade for books and book sales in Australia. And it's certainly been doing that so far. But the cost of living crisis hasn't hurt, because it has hurt us at the moment, because books are not a necessity, even though I think they are a necessity, but technically they're not a necessity. So there has been a bit of a drop in sales as people have had to manage all those other things that are going up in our lives at the moment, like petrol and gas and electricity and rents and mortgages and things like that. So that's the thing that's kind of limiting book sales at the moment, I think. But the trend was good before all that happened this year.
And just one last thing, and I'm hoping it's a positive end to the discussion. Do you think that the whole book talk kind of phenomenon is helping to usher in that kind of generational change? I know that now older people like me are on TikTok, but there are still obviously a lot of people that hasn't kind of totally become passé at this point. Do you think that they will be bringing in people to, already bringing in people as customers and potentially bringing in that next wave of kind of booksellers as well?
Definitely. I probably did forget to mention that when I did mention TikTok, that it is being driven by 16 to 24-year-olds. And for this old bookseller, it warms my heart that over the last 18 months, we have seen all these young people coming into the store excited about books. We have shopping baskets, and we, like every school holidays, we hear these screams and gasps of young people going around the store, and they're filling up baskets of books and buying them. And for me, it's like, oh my God, this is the next generation. They're already addicted to books. This is great. We're set up because they've got a love for the printed book. They're not doing the digital thing that everyone predicted. And in saying that, digital was always driven by the baby boomers, because they're the best early adopters of any technology. And young people are buying books and loving books, and they're the ones coveting these editions. And yeah, they are driving that book talk content, and for them they because it is all about sharing their reactions to books, and it's beautiful. And I know some bookshops are they kind of stick their noses up at what they're buying, because they're buying the Colin Hoovers of this world and books that, yes, they're not the best written book, but in the words of Paul Jennings, if they're reading the back of the cereal box, they're reading something. So the gateway to books, I don't care what the gateway is. And if it's not very well written, then you know what, that actually makes our job better, because we can start shifting them on to some better stuff as they develop as a reader. But never diss what someone reads, because at the end of the day, it's entertainment, and we all have our own secret little books that we read that aren't the highbrow stuff that we like to, that just, you know, we can knock over in a day, and it, you know, makes us feel good and we puts a smile on our face. So no, it's great. Young people are definitely into books, and there's a big future for reading built on the back of TikTok. It's really wonderful.
That's amazing. Thank you, Jon. So that is all that we have time for today. Thank you very much to our audience for joining us, and a really big, sincere thank you, Jon, for spending your time with us. We know how busy you are, and you've just shed so much light on the industry. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you for having me.
Folks, the next First Friday event will be held in the new year. It'll be on Friday, the 2nd of February, and we'll send you more details about that in January. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you at another Writing New South Wales event soon.